Hey, it's Rachel, and we are in the middle of a polar vortex right now, so you're only going to see me filming inside the greenhouse for a while. I created this video to share one of the last custom designs that I did for a client. I no longer offer custom design services because honestly I just couldn't keep up with the demand, but I do still have a few options that I'll share at the end of the video for people looking for some help. I felt this one was worth highlighting because the client's request is one that I get a lot. Namely, she wanted to grow a ton of her own produce and fresh eggs in the backyard, all without consuming her entire backyard or all of her available time. Let me walk you through how I achieved that. As always, I will keep this as succinct as possible, but there's a lot in this one, so grab your hot beverage of choice and let's dig in. She had a wide variety of crops that she wanted to grow, everything from multiple kinds of salad greens to fresh herbs, perennials including berries and mushrooms, as well as some vining perennials including grapes and hardy kiwi. She had plans for a future fruit orchard with a variety of fruit tree crops. She wanted to grow a number of brassicas, including broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, and cauliflower, as well as a large number of solanaceae plants, namely paste tomatoes, cherry or slicer tomatoes for fresh eating, and peppers, both hot and sweet. She had alliums on her list, onions and garlic, as well as other root crops, including beets, carrots, potatoes, and sweet potatoes. She had a large number of squash and melon plants, from winter squash, summer squash, watermelon, melons, and cucumber. And then she also wanted to grow several things in the legume family, including dried beans, fresh beans for eating, lentils, and split peas. And last but not least, backyard eggs. That is a lot. And here is an overhead view with north at the top of how I fit it all into her available space. She had an open sunny area about 60 feet by 55 feet, but she didn't want to use all of it for the garden. This design is 55 feet wide and 32 feet tall, fitting into that space while leaving some room for her future fruit orchard, and that'll go over to the west. Now, obviously, this is an ambitious plan, and I wanted to do everything possible to reduce her workload and manage her time. Here are the four main ways that I did that. First was to be very intentional with our infrastructure. The second was organizing the entire garden by frequency of access. The third was to take advantage of synergies and create useful groups. And last, and maybe most importantly, to execute this in specific phases. Starting with the first method of being smart with infrastructure, one key advantage is that she had access to a drip irrigation system already. Now, for larger gardens, I do strongly recommend adding a drip irrigation system as you scale up. If you build out in phases, like I'm going to suggest at the end of the video, you do not probably need this in year one, but as you start to scale up the garden, I highly recommend installing one. Our second infrastructure choice was to use deep raised beds made from concrete blocks and filled with lasagna materials on a woody hugelkultur style base. Now, raised beds do take more work than in-ground beds, but in her case, they made sense for three reasons. First, they improve drainage by getting your plants up and out of the ground, especially when you factor in the lasagna gardening and the hugelkultur approach that we're going to use here in a minute. That's critical given her heavy rainfall and her heavy clay soil. Second is their taller height. She informed me that she had many friends that had volunteered to come in and do sort of like a big garden installation party, and consequently, she felt quite confident that they would be able to build beds out of concrete block 2 or even 3 layers deep. And that height improves ergonomics and reduces bending. That becomes even more important when you scale up the garden and you have a lot of area to manage. And last, by having defined raised beds, she can line the bottoms with hardware cloth or chicken wire to help prevent burrowing animals such as gophers from getting into the garden. I suggested starting by cutting out the heavy clay sod in the areas of the beds, flipping it over and setting it aside. Then using concrete blocks to define the beds, placed on top of her hardware cloth burrowing barrier in a pinwheel pattern, and then repeating with the second pinwheel layer, staggering the seams. Now, when you stagger concrete blocks like this, sort of half a block off, the holes do still line up. And that means you can plant things like garlic bulbs or pollinator plants into those holes if you wish, and the roots can go all the way down and reach the soil. But staggering the seams like this, row to row, really improves the stability. I suggested adding at least 6 inches of wood chips or other spongy wood materials at the bottom of the bed, along with a permanent wood chip pathway down the middle, and then adding in her reserved sod pieces, topped with about 1 inch of compost. Using the reserved sod is extra work, but I knew she had friends to help, and it ensures good drainage underneath the beds where the sod is removed. It bulks up the material available to her, meaning she does not have to buy nearly as much compost to get the garden started, and it gives her all of the benefits of retaining that native clay soil, including high mineral content and excellent water retention. Looking at a cross-sectional view of our lasagna/hugelkultur beds, you can see the flow of water easily percolating into the compost and then down through that broken up clay, sod, and grass, then accumulating in the spongy wood layer where it is absorbed and held. This bank of water can then be used by the soil later, reducing the need for irrigation. Our third infrastructure choice was the form factor of the bed. Now, for larger gardens in particular, I am very fond of using the form factor of larger beds with a center access aisle down the middle. Now, there's two reasons for this. The first is build cost. The expensive part and much of the labor time of a raised bed is in building the perimeter. In the example here, I'm showing two smaller beds, 2 units tall by 8 units wide. Building both beds requires purchasing materials for a total perimeter of 40 units. This could be feet, meters, doesn't matter. If we instead build those as a single large bed with a wood chip walkway 1 unit wide down the middle, we now only need to purchase materials for a perimeter of 26 units, or about 2/3 of the cost for the same growing area. It's a significant savings, especially when wood chips can often be sourced for free from municipalities, arborists, or services like Chip Drop. And for larger grocery-style gardens, that cost savings is especially important because things can add up quickly. But there's a second reason that I really love this form factor, and that is an even greater ability to manage and retain heavy rainfall. When it rains, the water isn't only percolating into our growing beds, it's also able to quickly run down into the wood chip access path and soak into the wood chips. This captures and slows a lot of the rainfall hitting the surface of the bed, reducing the loss of soil and the risk of plants sitting in standing water. It also means that we have an even bigger bank of water in our beds from which the plants and soil can draw during dry or hot periods, reducing the demands on our irrigation even further. My last infrastructure decision was to concentrate all of the built elements together for a more efficient build. Let me zoom in on the west side of the garden. Now, the west edge of the garden, integrated with the outer fence, has one big build that includes our chicken coop, an attached chicken run with overhead cattle panels as cover, and then our compost bins with a gate opening into the garden to the east and another one opening out to the future orchard location to the west. I attached a strawberry gutter garden to the east side of the chicken run. I'm a big fan of these to keep the strawberries up and away from slug damage. And I placed her rain barrels and her mushroom bed on the west side, outside of the garden fence line. I get that this is a lot of infrastructure all in one place, but building them all together in one big unit like this has several advantages. First, it's an efficient use of your time and your money, because the structure for one can serve double duty as the support for another, rather than lots of little standalone builds. Second, the structures can anchor off of and support one another. Imagine a fence gate supported only by posts driven into the ground, as compared to a fence gate that you can attach to a large, heavy, and rectangular object, like a chicken coop or the side of a compost bin. The gate on one of those structures is much more secure and stable, and it has a lot more structural integrity versus building all of these as separate components. Let's talk about the second big theme. I organized this whole plan around the central theme of frequency of access, grouping things by daily, weekly, and monthly. Now, we're growing a lot of things, but only a few need to be accessed every day. These will generally be crops that have to be harvested daily, such as salad greens, herbs, summer squash, cherry tomatoes, cucumbers, fresh beans, and eggs. Now, the garden is located to the southeast of her house, meaning her logical access point is in the northwest corner. I placed her chicken coop right at that entrance gate, with the nesting boxes opening to the north side for easy egg collection, and then I placed one bed with all of her daily access crops in it, right in that same corner, so it's the first thing she sees as she enters the garden. Then I placed 4 beds holding her weekly access crops, the next closest to that main gate. Weekly access crops are things that you'll want to stay on top of weeding, like carrots and beets, or regular pruning, like with paste tomatoes. I also include crops that can have pest issues, like brassicas that can get eaten by cabbage moths, in this category because you'll want to inspect them at least once a week to avoid things getting out of hand. Note that this category needs to be specific to your area and to your pest pressures. If, for example, you knew you had a lot of squash vine borer activity, squash bugs, or cucumber beetles, you would also want to treat melons and squash like a weekly crop and get in there to check them for insect damage. This particular client did not have those pest pressures, and consequently we treated those crops as a monthly access. Speaking of monthly crops, those monthly access crops are your long season ones that need to be left in place quite a while to mature, as well as your perennials. I placed 4 monthly access beds the furthest from the gate, and I tucked the berry beds to the south of the compost bins. The mushrooms are on the west outside of the garden, and her vining perennials like grapes and hardy kiwi are on the trellis over the chicken run to be harvested from beneath, plus the strawberries on the east side as mentioned. But what about crop rotation? How does that work if we organize the garden this way? I'm glad you asked. The daily access bed has such a diverse mix of plant families in it that rotation isn't much of a concern. At most, I might think about using grow bags near the trellis for tomatoes to avoid diseases that can affect Solanaceae crops, but honestly, I think you'd be fine since we've only got 1 or 2 in the bed. Now, that's not the case for the weekly or monthly beds. They've got less diversity and they do need a rotation. But the nice thing about having 4 beds of each means that I can set up a rotation where my Solanaceae crops get 3 years off in between. I've got 1 weekly bed with my tomatoes and peppers in it, and then one monthly bed with potatoes. Those blocks can rotate on a 4-year rotation, and they each get 3 years off with nothing from the Solanaceae family growing in them. This means you can rotate for soil health, but also ensures that the crops you need to access most often are the ones most conveniently located. The third big method to save time and have less work was to take advantage of symbiotic relationships between members of a group. Chickens are particularly awesome for this, so let's start there. Let's zoom in for a minute on the chicken run here in the northwest corner. These arched cattle panel trellises on top of the run give these chickens overhead protection from aerial predators like hawks. When we plant vining perennials like grapes or hardy kiwi on those trellises, we dramatically improve that aerial overhead protection. We also give the chickens some really nice shade in the summer when those plants are fully leafed out. And that's especially beneficial considering this client can have very hot summer temperatures. Now what we get in exchange is easy harvesting access because the crops will hang down from these trellises and can be picked from underneath. The chickens will also pick up any dropped fruit for us that falls on the ground. It's a meal for them and less work for us. And they will happily eat bugs off of the plants. Grapevines in particular can attract Japanese beetles, and the chickens would be more than happy to take care of those for you. You're thinking, yeah, okay, Rachel, but how do we protect those plants from the chickens? You're going to need to line the lower part of those cattle panel walls with chicken wire in any case to keep the birds contained. What I would recommend, if you want to plant like this, is to put the vines just on the inside of those cattle panel trellis vertical sides. Then put your chicken wire inside of that, effectively loosely sandwiching that vine in between the two layers. That way the chicken wire can perform double duty of keeping the birds contained and also protecting the base of those vining plants from any chicken damage or scratching of the roots while they size up. Chickens are also great for reducing our workload in producing compost and in the orchard. She can take any chicken-safe food scraps from the kitchen, as well as chicken-safe weeds from the garden, and toss them directly into the run. The chickens get a free meal out of it, and they do a lot of the work of tearing up that material such that it will compost faster later. They're also adding their manure in the process, giving you compost that is much higher in nitrogen. If she wanted to, she could build these compost bins with flip-down fronts, let the chickens have access to it when she's ready to turn the pile, and they will do much of the work of tearing that down for her. She can then flip the top back and shovel the material back in to refill the compost bin. The additional benefit for the chickens is entertainment. They absolutely love tearing down piles and scratching through them. Particularly in the winter, it can be important to help them avoid getting bored, and giving them access to those compost piles is a great way to do that. When the compost is ready to be used on the garden, she has ready access with a wheelbarrow directly through this gate on the east side. Another fun source of compost is the bedding of the chickens in this coop. I haven't drawn the clean out door, but I did suggest she put one on the east side, large enough to easily reach in and shovel out the bedding. This can go into a wheelbarrow and travels a very short distance down to this compost pile where it can sit and finish until it is safe to be used on the garden beds. Raw chicken manure is too hot to go straight on, but she can easily add it to these compost bins and let it age. Now when it comes to the orchard, it will eventually be located to the west of the garden. Adding the gate here means that once the orchard is established and she has a secure fencing around it to keep the chickens safe, she can let them out to forage in that orchard. This means they can do two things for her. They can pick up fallen fruit. That can help break pest cycles as the larvae living in those fruits are consumed before they ever become adults. Free meal for the chickens, both the fruit and the insects inside, as well as a lot of elbow room. It can be nice for the chickens to get out periodically and get a lot of space to stretch out and a new environment to stimulate their senses. She will also get the added benefit of the chicken manure at the base of the trees that with rainfall can work its way down and act as a boost of nitrogen for the trees growing in that orchard. Moving on to our rain barrels in this same area of the garden. As previously mentioned, this client lives in a climate that does have heavy rainfall events. To take advantage of that, I suggested we slope the roof of the coop down towards the west and collect that rain into these rain barrels. That was a component that she did want to have in the garden, as she wanted to minimize the amount of supplemental irrigation and cost associated with that going into the garden. As the water runs down the roof, the intention is that it empties into this first barrel. The first barrel then overflows into the second barrel, and the second rain barrel overflows into the mushroom bed. This is a deep bed full of wood chips inoculated with the desired spore of mushroom. I personally grow Strophoria or wine cap mushrooms in my own garden. Getting a nice flush of mushrooms requires that these materials be kept damp pretty much all the time. Having this rain barrel overflowing into the bed helps us to create that environment and minimizes the amount of work required for her to go out and make sure that this thing is staying damp. Okay, let's talk about what we're doing in these annual beds in the middle, because we can create logical groupings there too. I'll zoom in on one of the weekly beds here to talk about my first pairing, heavy feeders and nitrogen fixers. There are plants in the legume family that fix nitrogen in partnership with symbiotic bacteria that live in their roots. Those bacteria can transform atmospheric nitrogen into a form that's usable by plants. And if you cut those plants off at the root after you harvest them and leave those roots to decompose in the soil, they will give the soil an extra boost of nitrogen. If we plant nothing but heavy feeders like these peppers and tomatoes in this bed, the next year, this soil would be really, really low on nitrogen. By also planting, in this case, lentils at the base of a trellis in the bed, I can cut those off when the harvest is done. Their roots will decompose and help replenish some of the nitrogen that was taken out by those heavy feeders. Similar logic over here with my brassica beds. I'll zoom in so you can see this. In both cases, I've taken the brassicas that are also heavy feeders and combined them with a trellis overhead that's growing, in this case, split peas, and over in the case of this bed, drying beans. The logic here is the same. The brassicas will remove quite a bit of nitrogen out of the soil, but at the end of the season, she can cut off all of those peas on this trellis and the beans on this trellis, leaving the roots to decompose and giving that boost of nitrogen back to help balance out the nutrients in the soil. And that's a good segue into the next grouping I want to talk about, shade lovers paired with overhead cover. In a prior video on design principles, I talked through different options for trellis placement and using them to create microclimates of shade and sun. And two of the options for arched trellises, the ones here with the turquoise color, can be great for specifically creating shade. I used the one on the right in this garden design. And the microclimate from this arched trellis is especially helpful in beds like these. Broccoli or cauliflower are subject to bolting under high heat, and because what we're harvesting in that case are the flower buds, we don't want them to bolt and set seed. We want them to just hold those flowers for as long as possible. Having these arched trellises overhead, completely covered in either split peas or dried beans, not only balances out the nitrogen, but as the summer progresses, it can provide really helpful shade. In the spring, you'll have nothing on the bed but your brassicas, and they get full sunlight to size up. But once you're past your first frost, things like beans can go on, and they will begin to climb up over this trellis, providing nice shade by the time we get into July or August, and those broccoli plants will hopefully keep producing well into the hot days of summer. I followed a similar approach over here on the daily bed. This bed has a lot of salad greens on the north half of it, and it has herbs growing on the south half of it, with additional salad greens flanking the walkway. Those greens, and in some cases the herbs, benefit similarly to the brassicas to having a bit of overhead shade in really hot summer months. In this case, I've used the trellis to grow things like cherry tomatoes, or on this side, some of our vining melons and squashes, as well as fresh beans. And similarly to the brassica beds, in the spring, we can plant out the bed with full sun on it, but as the summer progresses and we add these vining crops, they will grow up and over the trellis, providing shade below and helping to delay bolting and extend our harvest. My last key theme for this design is to build out a garden like this in phases. This is super important. Now, the most obvious reason to build in phases is that it helps spread out the financial investment and the time and labor, both of which can be significant, out into manageable chunks. But there are two more big reasons to do it. There's a reason I harp on this. The first is that you may get a year into this and decide that you just don't love gardening. Starting with a more manageable garden means that even if you do stop after just a few beds, you can still have enough space to get a good bang for your buck and grow some crops for fresh eating, but you'll be less likely to overinvest in building out a garden and then be angry with yourself later when you don't fully utilize it. The second reason is learning curves. When you're starting to grow your own groceries for real and you have specific production goals and more area to manage, even if you do love the process of gardening, you're going to still have a learning curve. Things will take more time than you expect until you find a rhythm, and it's super stressful to experience all of that at once with every crop. You're far better served by learning one thing and then moving on to the next, so that you can experience success at every stage, as opposed to experiencing frustration and failure all at once. Let's talk phasing. In her first year, I would start by putting in her daily access bed and 3 of her weekly access beds. That means she's only going to have 3 of her 4 weekly beds, but because 2 of those weekly beds were designated to grow brassica crops, I would suggest that she just pick one of those to install the first year. Keeping it smaller means that she can put up a temporary fence around the perimeter to keep out animals without the cost of fencing in the entire garden. Now, it's never too soon to start a compost bin, and I would recommend setting that up in the first year, especially since it can go outside of that temporary fencing. The second year, I would add in her 4th weekly access bed and 1 monthly access bed. Now, at this point, she only has 1 of her monthly beds available to her. Now, if it was me, I would probably pick the melon and squash bed because I love the flavor of a homegrown watermelon or melon, and also because crops like potatoes, sweet potatoes, onions, and garlic are really readily available in grocery stores inexpensively. The second year is also when I would suggest planting her berry beds behind the compost. They need a year or two to size up and produce a crop, and since they're expensive at the store, they are worth planting earlier. This whole thing can still be contained by a temporary fence, although she will need a bit more of it to surround the larger growing area. By her third year, she should have a much better sense of whether she's going to stick with gardening like this long term. That's when I would think about finishing her monthly access beds and building the coop, run, and strawberry gutters. Now I know, everybody wants eggs, and I'm holding off the chickens until year 3. I have a backyard flock. I love it. It's one of the best parts of my garden. The chickens are hilariously goofy, and the egg quality is amazing. And we've had egg shortages and price spikes, and I know everybody is chomping at the bit to get a backyard flock. There's a reason I'm going to strongly encourage you to wait. The reason I recommend delaying eggs, even though there is a real benefit and financial payback to raising your own, is that while chickens aren't hard to have, they are living creatures. They do have needs. They can get sick. They can get injured. And the last thing you want to try and do is to manage those kinds of situations on top of the steep learning curve you're already going to be experiencing your first year or two of scaled backyard food production. These are living creatures. They need to be treated humanely. And I would strongly recommend that you not introduce them into your system until you have all of the other components well under control. Okay, I'll get off the soapbox now. The last 2 components are building the permanent long-term fencing and installing the fruit tree orchard. Both of those are not cheap, and both of those are a fair amount of work. I would say you could delay those out to year 4 to avoid doing them at the same time as that large coop and run build in the northwest corner. As always, I hope that was helpful. I have links in the video description below, as well as a QR code here at the end, for anybody that would like to purchase the full detailed plan set for this design, including the dimensioned bed layouts for all of the different beds, and some additional construction details on the coop and the chicken run. Other options for support, as promised. I did finally create an online course after several of you requested it, pulling together everything you would need to know to design your own backyard grocery garden, from how you translate servings into the space required, to how you develop a standard bed size and a crop rotation. Since I can't realistically provide custom design work for everybody that wants it, this was the best way for me to help in the most scalable and affordable way. I've got a link in the video description to that as well, and a QR code here at the end for anybody that wants to check out and pre-order that course. It's going to go live on February 7th, 2026 for the first spring cohort. Now, the third option is you can always submit a request for a design case study. I've put a link in the video description for that as well, for you to go in and enter the details of your requested case study. If I select your case study, I will make a video about it similar to this one, and I will put together detailed plans for sale on the website. I can't get to every request, but it is a potential third option for help. I hope that everybody's garden planning is going well, and that you are having as much fun as I am getting lost in the seed catalogs. Until next time, thanks.